and welcome to Mission Report with Chris Dush. Today, as my special guest, I've got Judge Cheryl Allen. And I want to start with, we were founded as a Christian nation, founded in truth. If we don't understand that, we fall into deception and eventually destruction. Reminiscent of Pennsylvania's founder, William Penn, and many of America's founders, this is a direct foundational statement of truth from today's podcast guest, Judge Cheryl Allen. Widely recognized as a trailblazer in the constitutional rule of law, Judge Allen is the first Black woman to be elected to Pennsylvania Superior Court, where she served from 2008 until her retirement in 2015. A Pittsburgh native and former Pittsburgh public school teacher, Judge Allen is a graduate from Penn State University and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, presently serving as counsel with Pennsylvania Family Institute and the Independence Law Center. Judge Allen continues her tireless fight to stop the weaponization of cancel culture by protecting life, religious liberty, traditional marriage, and parental rights. Some of her most recent faith and family-based policy priorities include opposing Governor Shapiro's plan to legalize high-potency marijuana, barring biological males from competing in women's sports, and keeping abortion out of Pennsylvania's Constitution and public schools. Welcome, Judge Allen. It's an honor, it truly is, to have you on today's Mission Report podcast. I'd like you to please provide the audience with some more information on your judicial background and what specific factors caused you to change your affiliation. Well, I'll let you go into that.
Well, good morning, Senator, and good morning to your audience. And it is an honor to be with you this morning to talk about these issues, of which we are both so passionate about. And as you stated, I am from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. I was born in Homestead, Pennsylvania, and I attended the Pittsburgh Public Schools, Penn State University, where I got my degree in elementary education. I taught school in the Pittsburgh Public Schools, second grade to be exact, and I decided in 1972 to enroll in the University of Pittsburgh School of Law because an opportunity opened up for me. And after graduating from law school, I practiced law for about 15 years, and then I ran for Common Pleas Court. Well, actually, I was nominated by Governor Casey for appointment to the bench in 1990, and I ran in 1991 successfully. I served for 10 years. I was retained in 2001. And I had an unsuccessful run for the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 2003, which was a very eye-opening experience for me because I was running as a registered Democrat. And I found out quick, fast, and in a hurry that being a Bible-believing Christian, being a person who is very much pro-life, that was just not a good mix for me. And so, I ended up changing my registration. I ran successfully for the Pennsylvania Superior Court in 2007 and served there, as you said, until my retirement. And here I am working for the Pennsylvania Family Institute and really finding it to be a very fulfilling, exciting experience.
Well, I'll kind of disagree with you on the fact that it wasn't being a Bible-believing Christian and stuff wasn't a good fit for you. It just wasn't at the time a good fit for the Democrat Party.
Well, that's I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say. It wasn't a good fit for me in the Democrat Party.
Yes.
And that's what I really meant.
I mean, looking back to 1991, the difference between 1991 and 2003, that must have been astounding to you because you were very open about who you were in 1991 when you were running for Common Pleas Court in Pittsburgh.
Actually, no, I really wasn't, because
No?
I would not have considered myself to be a Bible-believing, born-again Christian at that time in my life. If you know anything about my history,
Well, that's one part I wasn't aware of, so please.
I wasn't always. In fact, I sometimes astound people when I tell them that at one point in my life, I was to the left of Bernie Sanders and AOC. And people are always very surprised to hear that, but actually that's the truth. You know, I grew up in, as I told you before, I grew up in Homestead, Pennsylvania,
Yes.
near Homestead, Pennsylvania, actually. And it was my father. My father had three brothers. His oldest brother was a pastor, and his second oldest brother was a card-carrying communist.
Wow.
And he identified with that brother. And as I grew up, that was my favorite uncle, and that's who I identified with also. And so, you know, that experience led me or took me in a lot of directions that people would really that I'm surprised at when I look back. Because I became involved with a women's organization that was affiliated with the Women's International Democratic Federation. And through that experience, I traveled to the Soviet Union, what was then the Soviet Union, at least 4 times for conferences and to meet people. And I remember in 1986, I was, as part of that women's organization, I became part of a national coalition called Women for a Meaningful Summit. And I was able, with that organization, to go to Geneva when President Reagan met with Gorbachev. And I remember being in that delegation, and there was only one other Black woman in that delegation other than me, and that was Maxine Waters, who was an assemblywoman in California at the time. And so we gravitated toward one another, and we hung out together in Geneva and went souvenir shopping together. And I don't know if you remember that history, but Reverend Jesse Jackson was also part of that delegation. He actually met with Gorbachev. So I had an opportunity to meet him. And when I look back on that experience, and I look back especially at Congresswoman Maxine Waters, I will say 1990, she became a congresswoman. She had been an assemblywoman, which is like one of our state representatives in California. She became a congresswoman in 1990. I became a judge in 1990. That's the last contact I've had with her. But when I look at my life today and I look at her, and I think that but for the grace of God, you know, but for his divine intervention,
Yes.
that could be me. And it's just, I just sit in awe sometimes at what God has done in my life. Because in 1991, when I ran for Common Pleas Court, first of all, we had a Supreme Court case in operation called Minnesota versus White, or that came into operation after I ran. Because in 1991, you didn't have to discuss your political views.
Right.
In fact, you were prohibited from discussing your political views or from saying, you know, this is what I believe about this issue. This is what I believe about this issue. But when the case of Minnesota versus White was decided, which was sometime between 1991 and 2003, basically the Supreme Court ruled that that was a violation of the candidate's First Amendment. And so by 2003, people could come right out and ask you what you stood for. And even if you gave that kind of answer, you would probably lose votes on both sides of the aisle. And so I found out that in 2003 that you have to take your stand and stick with it, because otherwise you would find yourself in a spirit of compromise and confusion. So that, I think the case of Minnesota versus White is what happened between 91 and 2003 that really changed everything. Now, instead of a judge candidate being evaluated on the basis of their temperament, their knowledge of the law, their experience, and therefore their fitness for the position, you're evaluated on the basis of your political stance. And, politics, I mean, I remember I think it was 2009, I was asked by the Philadelphia Inquirer what I believe to be the greatest impediment to justice in our court system. And my response was politics. I gave that one-word answer, and when I was asked to expound on the answer, I gave them examples of how politics have taken over our court system. Now, I had no idea how prophetic those words were. And because today, you cannot hear a news report about a court decision, a federal court decision in particular, without first hearing who appointed that judge to the bench. And, if it was an Obama appointee or a Clinton appointee or a Trump appointee, then they expect you to form some preconceived notion about the fairness or the legitimacy of the decision. And I think we all saw here in Pennsylvania, when we had the pay for play or the Kids for Cash case in Luzerne County. And I look back on that case and I consider the district attorneys, the assistant district attorneys, the public defenders, the entire court system had to know what was going on, but no one would speak up for political reasons because it could have been politically harmful. And that's what I see in our court system today. And certainly the past 4 years, what we've seen with now President Trump, whether you like Trump or agree with his policies or agree with his personality or his disposition, the fact of the matter is, all of those cases, in my view, were brought for strictly political reasons, rather than having any basis in law.
That's, to me, where I first started seeing it, the severity of it was when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we had justices that were running on changing the education distribution center systems, doing the drawing of congressional maps, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And when they got into, they got in and they did exactly what they did. Policy making is the purview of the legislative branch. It's not the executive. Neither the executive, well, to some level, the executive has it, but the judicial does not. The judicial is strictly to interpret the law and apply and ensure that it's being applied in the manner in which the law was created. And when they hired a California professor to redraw the congressional maps here in Pennsylvania, that was a purely political act.
2 years before.
Yes.
2 years or 3 years before the law called for them to do that.
Yes.
It's
and the only time that they're authorized to do that is after a certain time period, after the census, when the legislature, if we and the governor can't come to an agreement, that's the only time that the Supreme Court, they have to have a set period of time before they can step in. They called the current maps at the time unconstitutional, which they have the authority to do. But what they didn't have the authority to do was step in immediately and
redraw the maps in preparation for the 2018 midterm elections.
Yes.
And what I found to be even most disturbing is some of them actually campaigned on that issue.
Yes, they did.
And that is illegal in and of itself, but no one did anything about it.
Well, I had impeachment resolutions against 4 of them for that one. But got my butt chewed over it, but
Right,
now the people
right,
that had the ability to bring that impeachment forward that were chewing my butt are now telling me it was one of the biggest mistakes they ever made in not following through on it.
correct,
So
correct. But and so, that's something we saw them do. And then recently, they expanded the definition of, or the process for becoming a parent in this state.
yes,
Uh, they've created a fifth category for achieving parenthood, something that was totally unnecessary on their part, especially given the facts scenario of that particular case. But that's what they did. And so they are a very activist court with an agenda. And again, politics plays no role or should play no role in the court system. But we've seen it happen nationally. We've seen it happen in New York to a large degree, and we've seen it happen in Pennsylvania over the past 10 years.
indeed. And you held a position on the appellate court that's between the people and the Supreme Court. And so you've had the ability to deal with those constitutional issues and address those constitutional issues for a number of years. And so you've got a unique perspective on how much the courts have changed, especially when it comes to the appellate courts, including the Superior, Commonwealth, and Supreme Courts in Pennsylvania. And I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the fact that you've been vocal about that over the years, where they have overstepped their authorities. One of the things that I've brought up over and over again, I said we're the Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution guarantees that each state that a Republican form of government. We're not a democracy, but every sports franchise has copied it that you've got in the form of our covenant. You have the parties and God and the people, then the purpose of the Constitution, just like in any other contract. Then with forms of governance, you have the people who make the rules under that contract. That's the legislature. That's Article 2. Article 3 is the legislation or the law, how it's done and its purpose. Then you have the executive branch, was like the players and coaches, and the judicial, the referees. They're literally and figuratively under the law. The lawmakers are the ones who have the ability to change law. It's not the purview of the courts, and the courts can interpret just like they can call the balls and strikes or the fouls, whatever, but they don't have the ability to write law and make policy. And that's where this Supreme Court, and as you mentioned, others around the United States have overstepped their authority.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, given the fact that we have an elected court here in Pennsylvania, and certainly there are some benefits to having judges run for election. However, with regard to the Supreme Court in particular, it's become such a high stakes money
Yes.
game that, and we know that it takes millions of dollars, as it did in 2015, for someone to be elected to the Supreme Court. And if you're not independently wealthy, then you are dependent upon special interest groups or wealthy donors to give you the money to run. And then it becomes a question of, where are your loyalties? Are your loyalties to the people who have funded you, or are your loyalties to the rule of law and the Constitution? And,
We're kind of going down a different path than I had suggested, but I want to keep going down this one for a minute. For instance, you had mentioned the money, which is something that has played a huge part in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court elections. I look at the venue shopping. As soon as they got onto the court, they tried to put venue shopping back on, where you could bring, in accident and malpractice suits. You could bring people from as far away as Erie down to Philadelphia
Correct.
to get larger jury awards. And what is disturbing, we pushed back when I was in the House, we pushed back against that. And I remember Sam Pond from Pond Lehocky being there, and he's there in that perfectly coiffed mane of white hair of his, and that looked like it was a bespoke suit, you know, a few $1,000 suit, the Italian leather shoes and all that. And we pushed back against that, and we made some good points, because we were losing in the medical field. We were losing our OBGYNs across the Commonwealth. We were losing other specialists, and they came up to Representative Overlander, who was running the hearing, and they said, "You've won for now, or you've won this time." But they've since brought it back, and they've implemented it, and in travels over to Philadelphia and stuff, I saw on the turnpike, I started seeing the Pond Lehocky signs show up. And now, just recently, I was out on a trip to Cleveland, and 14 miles from the Ohio border on I-80, there's another Pond Lehocky sign. That money, you know, the judges are not supposed to be political. And when you're making political decisions that direct something that becomes a benefit to the people who helped you get into office, that's it's not the way we're supposed to be running the courts.
Well, you know, I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And having run, I've had the experience of receiving questionnaires from various political groups or special interest groups. And, you know, in keeping with what we see happening in the state today, you're always going to receive a questionnaire from Planned Parenthood. You're always going to receive a questionnaire from the teachers' unions. And when you read those questionnaires, you can see very clearly what the agenda is for the education system, as well as the abortion issue. And then you find yourself in the position of, well, I can't complete these questionnaires unless I decide to not be truthful about my stance. But anyway, these are the people who are, in addition to the lawyers, who are funding these campaigns.
Yep.
They are the ones providing the campaign contributions to those whose worldview or political stance agrees with theirs. And that has no place in our court system, but that's what we have. And so.
Well, let's get to some of the things that you're actually working on. I'd like to start with Governor Shapiro's efforts to try and legalize these high-potency marijuana products that are available in some other states right now. I know you've been pushing back on this for quite some time, and I'd like to hear your perspective.
Well, Governor Shapiro, along with many of our other elected officials, are advancing this idea that marijuana for recreational purpose should be legal, and that marijuana is harmless, that it's not addicting, and that, you know, other states are realizing this tremendous financial windfall because of recreational marijuana being legalized, and we're somehow missing out on this potential revenue source. And as we really look at what's going on around the country, and I think there are at least 24 states that have legalized marijuana use for recreational purposes, and I don't believe that a single state can really step forward and say, we have just realized this tremendous financial windfall. It solved all our budget shortfall problems. In fact, I did read a statistic in Colorado, which I believe was among the first states to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. where they basically said that for every dollar of tax revenue they receive, they're spending $4.50 dealing with the consequences, the traffic accidents, the emergency room admissions, the addiction issues, and all of the problems that come with addiction. The lack of productivity with regard to or finding workers who can pass a drug test for a position that requires complete sobriety, like being a bus driver or airline pilot or a truck driver or someone who operates heavy equipment. And the toll on our young people has just been devastating. Now, I spent 12 years of my 25-year judicial career serving as a judge in juvenile court. And then I spent 5 years serving as a judge in criminal court. And I can assure everyone who's listening that the number one reason that children come into the foster care system is because of addiction, substance abuse. Most of the crime in our state has some connection to drug addiction or substance abuse. Most of the crime. And many of the car accidents, and in criminal court, the number of DUIs, people driving under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance. I mean, that accounts for most of the crime. And so how anyone can justify pushing or advancing an industry whose success depends upon increasing the drug dependence among its population, I don't see how you justify that. Because the role of government is to protect people, is to protect its population, not to engage in policies and practices which bring further harm to the community, to families, to children. I mean, there's no good that anyone can really cite that has come from legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes.
Yeah, in fact, I saw a video of the gentleman who was mayor of Denver at the time that the law was passed for recreational use. And he says he wishes he could take his vote back. And even with the medical marijuana program that we have here in Pennsylvania, it was ill-conceived. I voted against it because I knew there were going to be, I had a lot of questions that are coming to fruition. And the interesting thing with that is now as a legislator, I'm dealing with parents who are telling me that their 20-something child is in some place like Torrance, or well, they had to, one in particular, her son had to go out to Ohio before he could get to Torrance, but they can't take the medical marijuana card away. Even the psychologists and the people who are caring for that young man, they don't have the ability to remove that card from him, and it's triggered schizophrenia in him.
Right.
And they can't treat him simply because he refuses to give up the medical marijuana card. And in that case, there's really no hope for him unless we can get that changed. So these high potency marijuana, the high potency marijuana that's available today is not what it was in the 60s and 70s by any stretch. It doesn't take as much to trigger things like schizophrenic reactions. Doesn't take as much to cause addiction. And with the recreational, California, their biggest problem out there is they package it, but it's easy to duplicate the packaging. So you can't tell the legal stuff from the illegal. They try to control it, but it's easy with the high quality printers and stuff that are available now. And one of the sheriffs out there, he says he's got more AK-47s and marijuana plants, and he's standing with his arms stretched in front of this one plant that's out there that when they had done a raid, he says, I'm seeing more of this than I've ever seen since once they legalized it.
Well, that's the other fallacy, because they tell us that, well, this will do away with the black market. And that's just simply not true. That's been well proven and established in California and in just about every state that has managed to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. It does not do away with the black market. And it's my understanding that Governor Shapiro is proposing a 20% tax on the sale of marijuana, which means that it will be priced out of the market for most people. And if they can buy it cheaper on the street or from some illegal means, that's exactly what they're going to do. And then you're still going to have a black market, and you're still going to have a criminal justice system which incarcerates people for the illegal sale of marijuana. So there's no good way to implement a system that is based upon wrong.
Right.
You can't find a good way to do something that is wrong. And this is wrong. And we have people talking about expanding the state store system. That's not going to work, and it's not going to do away with the black market. Then you have people talking about private entrepreneurship and how, this is going to benefit minority entrepreneurs, that they're going to be able to participate in this profit-making venture. But we've seen that happen time and time again. When they want to promote something that is wrong, you buy off some of the community leaders or a handful of people, but you don't take into account the impact on the masses of people in a particular community. I've heard people talk about, okay, well, there's a disproportionate number of Blacks and minorities who are going into the criminal justice system because of our failure to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. But they ignore the fact that there's also a disproportionate number of Blacks and other minorities in the foster care system, whose families are broken up or destroyed because of addiction, whose communities are destroyed because of addiction, because the crime in those communities go up, just across the board. And I have not heard of any positive thing that can possibly come from this. The only people who are, at the end of the day, the only people who are going to benefit are the marijuana corporate interest. And even if we were to have a system where a certain percentage of minority groups or other community groups could be licensed to sell marijuana, I really honestly and truthfully believe that at the end of the day, we're going to see the same thing that we've seen with regard to supermarkets. You can't find a mom and pop grocery store hardly anymore. You can't find a privately owned or individually owned drugstore anymore.
Yep.
And the same thing is going to happen if we go down this road. It's going to end up being the corporate conglomerates who make all the money, and it's the population in general who's going to suffer.
And you and I could have some long conversations, and I'm sure on some stuff. You've had a lot of opportunity to dig into and see professionally the responses or what happens as a result of poor policy making. Another thing that you're working on is the cultural impact of allowing men into women's sports. I know you're pushing back against that as well. Mm-hmm. Something that as a former swimmer and watching what happened with Paula Scanlon and Riley Gaines, that's been it just appalled me what was going on in that locker room down at the University of Pennsylvania.
Right.
But beyond the locker room, there's also what happens on the field of play. And I'd like you to address what you're working on in that space.
Well, we are working with some of the senators to advance legislation in that regard, because the reality is, we have people who believe that sexual identity is a question of feeling and not biology. So if you feel that you are a member of another sex, then that's the way society should treat you. But when it comes to sports, number one, feelings don't compete, bodies compete. And there is a difference between the male physiology or body and a woman. I looked at, for example, with regard to the University of Pennsylvania and the biological male who I chose to identify as a female. Common sense would dictate that when he dives into the pool, he's already well ahead of all of the women just by virtue of the fact that he's 6 feet 4 inches in height. And regardless of how he may feel, you cannot negate that physical advantage. You cannot negate the fact that he has a greater muscle mass, the whole 9 yards. Women and men are different. And that's a biological reality that we should not ignore. And then I remember hearing the young women talk about how they felt about having this man who, as I understand it, had not gone through any surgical procedures, walking around the locker room naked, with his genitalia in full view of everyone, and just the trauma involved in that. So obviously, this movement has chosen to consider the feelings of a few people at the expense of the majority. And that is simply not right. And you can't make it right. I don't care, how many adjectives you change or how much language you attempt to adjust, or how you tend to utilize different vocabulary words. The fact of the matter is that bodies compete and our bodies are different. And women have a right to privacy just as men have a right to privacy.
Yeah. You said in relation to the marijuana thing that there's no good way to make a bad thing work, or you can't.
Right.
Basically. Paula had been sexually assaulted while she was in high school, and then for her to have to, when she got into, or when that gentleman got put into the locker room with her, and the first time she heard his voice in the locker room, in that space that was supposed to be for women, separated for their safety so that they can change properly. The first time she heard that, it just brought kind of a flashback kind of a thing, and a sense of intimidation and fear. And the intimidation factor never left her through that whole experience for that season of sports. In fact, she went back after the last swim meet. She left everything in her locker room and never returned until after graduation, when she went back with her mother to go into the locker room to get her stuff. And just exactly what you said about the feelings of one individual over everybody else that's on that team, all the women that felt that they had a safe place to go up until that point. You're demanding that all those women sacrifice their safety, their sense of security. So there's no way to make that right.
No, there isn't. And I was listening to a congresswoman the other day, and they were talking about the fact that we who are trying to protect women's rights are denying trans women the right to participate in sports. And that's simply not true. Lia Thomas, as she became known, had participated in sports to the fullest extent before becoming Lia Thomas. He just participated in sports involving biological men.
Yes.
Of which he is a biological man.
Yes.
And there's no denying that. Now, the fact that he decided to identify with women doesn't change the fact that he is a male. And he is not being denied the right to participate in sports. He should be denied the right to participate in sports with biological women. Period.
Yep. Well, I appreciate what you're doing on that topic. And you've also been involved with a lot of parental rights issues. And I want to get into that. Senate Bill 7 was legislation that required parental notification of sexually explicit content in the child's school, give the parent an opt-out authority to limit their child's access to obscene materials. Would you please go into some of the things that you've been dealing with, what you faced in this battle?
Well, it just astounds me that parents would have to, or even if they are given the opportunity to opt out, why should this be in our schools to begin with? I mean, that it shouldn't be a question of opting out. It should be a question of this not being permitted in our schools. And I remember back when the issue was hot in Florida, and people, dubbed it the "Don't Say Gay" rule. The fact of the matter is, young children should not be exposed to pornographic literature, to sex at all, regardless of what type of sex it is.
Right.
I just cannot understand how anyone could believe that exposing young children to sexually explicit literature or books is a good thing or a healthy thing.
No.
And it just blows my mind, and it really corrupts the entire public education school system, in my view. And I just don't understand. I mean, I'm having a hard, well, I do understand. I mean, I do understand what the end objective is. The end objective is to break down and destroy the family. And by teaching children that marriage should not be something that you enter into with the idea that it's forever, or the idea that parental authority matters not, to separate children from their parents' authority. And the ultimate goal is to destroy the foundations of our society. And the family unit is part of that foundation. And that's what we have to consider. It's the thing that we see out front, the real issue that we see that we're faced with is not often the real issue.
Right.
That is just a tool or that is being used to accomplish the real issue. The real issue is the breakdown of our society.
When the Bible talks about we will be at a point where we call evil good and good evil.
Absolutely.
And that's a point where we are right now, when they have taken advantage of something that was meant to allow things like this isn't Catcher in the Rye that we're seeing in the school libraries. This is actual pornographic material.
Yes.
But they've taken an exemption that was put in the law to allow good literature that sometimes got a little risque, but to get into actual outright pornographic material that when we held a rally here in the Capitol, we had to make steps to ensure that no children were able to come in to see the stuff that we were publishing. And I challenged the media. I said, go ahead, put this on the front page above the fold on your newspapers, put it out on your television broadcasts and see what happens to you, because they would be shut down immediately under the law, because the law prohibits exposing children to this stuff. But there's this odd exception that they've allowed within the school systems, and they're screaming book ban, book ban. Well, that's not what this is about. This is about protecting the innocence of the children,
Right.
which the law actually does allow for, demand protecting that innocence, except for that one space. And we've got to make sure that we push back to make that space safe again for these children.
And when they talk about book bans, I mean, let's be honest, there are certain books that they do ban from the public school system.
Oh my, yes.
And we know what those books are. So they're not against book banning, they're just against certain books being banned, which really defeats the legitimacy of their argument.
Yeah, Benjamin Rush was known as the founder of Christian education in the United States, but it was more like he was the founder of the education system in the United States. He was a signer of the Constitution. He produced textbooks that were biblically based, and it's interesting in that they actually did a poll. It was late 1700s or early 1800s, or a survey, and the literacy rate up in Massachusetts, where they were teaching from the Bible directly, the literacy rate was something like 94% among all the people in Massachusetts. Nowadays, when you destroy the whole foundation, you take the stories away that help build the foundation, a good moral foundation. The desire to learn, to really learn and understand, goes away, and you're just left with responding with feeling to whatever happens.
Well, there was a time, and you may be referring to the New England Primer.
Yes.
That was the book that they used to teach young people how to read. And they started with A, the letter A, and they joined it with the Bible. So Adam,
Yes,
was the first. And so you learned the Bible and you learned to read simultaneously. Now they've replaced the New England Primer, at least when I was in school, with See Spot Run.
yes.
and other types of simple-minded subjects. I hate to even think about what they're using now.
Right.
In this day and age. But as a result, in addition to our young people having no biblical foundation whatsoever, they're also dumbed down. I mean, the critical thinking, they're taught what to think rather than how to think. And there's a big emphasis on social and emotional learning. So feelings.
Yes.
are stressed rather than facts, rather than learning the facts of history or the truth about the history of this nation. They're learning about feelings and how to express their feelings. It's really very, very sad. And then, it really hurts. It really bothers me, especially in the Black community, to hear people being told that, they're trying to take away your public education now by doing away with the Department of Education. I managed to go through 12 years of high school, 4 years of college, law school without the Department of Education.
Yep.
And
I managed to get through high school. It came about when the year that I graduated, the law passed, but the department didn't actually exist until the following year. So,
Right. So, now I guess I'm aging myself, but the fact of the matter is, we didn't have a Department of Education. Well, the law didn't go into effect until 1980. I think
yes.
it passed sometime in late 1979, before during Jimmy Carter's, the end of his presidency.
Yes.
So people don't understand that, and they don't understand that one way you fundamentally change society is to centralize control over the fundamental aspects of it, like healthcare, like education, so on and so forth. So yes, I mean, we're not going to lose anything by dismantling the Department of Education. Have much to gain from it, actually, but people don't know that because they listen to the news media and, those who are trying to deceive them. And it just really disturbs me to no end that whenever the left wants to try to add legitimacy to something that should not be legitimized, they always want to link it to civil rights, or somehow it's racist, or somehow marginalized people are going to be harmed, and so therefore we have to keep this system in operation.
We spend more time in the legislature trying to undo or fix the things that we've done in the past than we do in actually enacting good original pieces of legislation to take care of things. The whole idea of a centralized government is over every aspect of the human experience is anathema to what our founders intended in this country. And it's what the founders intended led to all the prosperity, not just here in the United States, but much of what's happened in the rest of the world to elevate people in those countries. It's just astounding to me that we look at trying to do more and more centralization. What's happened with healthcare, what's happened in education. The education scores, the literacy rates, the math proficiency, all that has plummeted since the Department of Education was created. And I'll say even the State Department of Education, the regulations, I have 90 pages of unfunded mandates that the state and federal government have pushed onto the school systems. When 1968, my dad had graduated from Clarion after he broke into his back, went to school to become a teacher, and he was doing his student teaching at Brookville High School. And we were one of the last, we're about 80 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, and we were one of the last in the state to really start adopting all this stuff where you're buying the McGraw-Hill stuff that Texas and California were buying because they had a unified system. They had produced all these textbooks in bulk. So if you bought the bulk stuff, you got the best price. Our school system, the administration was, they had some business owners who were on the board that said, you guys that are the department heads work with your teachers, you mentor them, and you also select the stuff that actually works. Well, in '68, we had a huge number of students who had taken the SAT and ACT tests. We were only a small fraction behind Valley Forge Prep in the scores. And usually when you have a whole bunch of students take it, it reduces the scores as a bulk for the school. They came out to find out why, and it's because of that independent mindset that they had in that school system. I was a beneficiary of it. It was just amazing. That held on for the additional 10, 11 years until I graduated. But it was just astounding. It's something that I can look back on personally and see the difference as we've migrated into some of these adopted some of these things that the state and the federal government have pushed down, it's not been a benefit to
No.
us.
No, not at all.
Leonard Read wrote a letter or an essay in The Economist back in the 50s. It's called I, Pencil, the autobiography of the pencil as told to Leonard Read. And it goes into all the different things that are necessary to form a pencil. And it was a speaking out against the 1950s push towards the Soviet type or socialist communist type centralization of government. There's nobody in my role, in a president's role, a governor's role, or even a secretary of education role that can tell you everything that needs to happen to be effective at creating something or running something. It's the people that are at the working end of things that have a passion for teaching, a passion for building something that can make all the things come together to be effective. So this evil that is trying to have central government control over things, it truly is evil, and we do need to call it out. Do you have any updates on the taxpayer funded experimentation on babies, for instance, like down at Pitt? I know you're fighting against that kind of stuff as well. Yeah.
Well, I really don't have too much in that regard, except that I know that living here in the Pittsburgh area, we have experimentation going on at the University of Pittsburgh. And I know that there has been a movement in the legislature to deny the University of Pittsburgh state funding for that in that regard.
Yeah.
I also know that the Trump administration has been looking into those funding sources as they relate to the National Institute of Health, because that's where the money is coming from. So I know that there are people who are looking into those things. I know that the University of Pittsburgh wants to be known as for its scientific experimentation. They want to be known as a tremendous research institution. I have been told by people who are either on or close to the board of the university that they plan to continue with the research, and that the only thing that would stop it is if somehow it was criminalized. I believe that one could interpret the existing law to criminalize it, but they're looking to the legislature to enact criminal laws in that regard before they would stop. Because as I am told, the amount of money that they receive from the state of Pennsylvania, the tax revenue that they receive is minuscule, is very, very limited as compared to what they receive from the National Institute of Health. And so that if they have to return to being a privately funded university, they're prepared to do that. Now, University of Pittsburgh has only been a state-related institution or university since 1966. And I remember that well because when I graduated from high school, we considered the University of Pittsburgh to be too expensive for me to even consider applying there. And it was after my freshman year in college that they became a state-related institution. And from what I understand, they're prepared to go back to being a privately funded institution if they have to, rather than give up the funding that supports their research. And that's very sad, but it's the truth. And so I am hoping and praying that something happens on the federal level through the Trump administration, but that remains to be seen.
Well, given what happened with Fauci's support with the Chinese government on COVID, and you know, when they start messing around with the kind of things that on genetic modification of things, what Pitt is doing, I think there's a direct correlation with what Pitt is doing there and what Anthony Fauci and the Chinese government was doing with weaponization of a virus. So I'm hoping that there is some headway in that movement there. But you've been very active in the pro-life movement as well. There are a whole lot of other areas. Do you want to address some of the things that you're working on with PA Family and the other organizations?
Well, the biggest issue as far as the pro-life issue is concerned is that, you know, Real Alternatives lost its funding, regrettably, and we just, since Roe v. Wade was overturned, we've just witnessed an all-out assault by the pro-abortion industry against the pro-life movement. What they're trying to do to discredit and eliminate pregnancy care centers.
Yes.
The way that they are promoting the chemical abortions. You know, when I hear these women talk about the fact that abortion should be a decision between a woman and her doctor, well, you know, with the pregnancy, with the chemical abortions, they're actually removing the doctor from the equation. You know, when a woman can just call a phone number and acquire an abortion pill and self-administer that medication. I mean, that's how far we've gone. And we understand that even in Pennsylvania, the majority of abortions are chemical abortions at this point. And while this is an industry that pretends or states that they are concerned about women's health, we know that being able to obtain an abortion pill through the mail and self-administer it really places women's health at greater risk of harm. Because to engage in such a procedure without any medical supervision or oversight is dangerous. And, you know, I find myself telling audiences that even if a person is pro-choice, so to speak, that's a very deadly and potentially deadly and dangerous choice to make, to take this pill without medical supervision. And we saw during the election, you know, there was much noise about what happened in Georgia with the two women who died. The news media would tell you that they died because of the restrictive abortion laws in Georgia. But the fact of the matter is they died because they self-administered these abortion pills without any medical supervision, and they died of sepsis. And when they died, actually 5 people died, 2 women and 3 children, because one of them was carrying twins, which an ultrasound would have established had there been some medical supervision. So we're in a period of time where the enemy is stepping up his game, and it's not enough, you know, it's not enough for him that abortion up to 24 weeks remains legal in Pennsylvania. That's not enough, because we know Roe v. Wade had no impact whatsoever on the law in Pennsylvania. The law is the same as it was before Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yes.
But through disinformation, through the news media, this industry is somehow able to convince women that their health care is in jeopardy. Abortion is not health care.
No.
At all, but they've managed to create this impression that women are going to die if they can't get an abortion. It's interesting. I was talking to a woman in another state that I know, and we were talking about this whole issue of abortion. And she told me she had had an abortion. And then when she went on to explain the details of what happened to her, what actually happened to her was that she had a miscarriage. And they had to induce labor, or I don't know if it was through the inducement of labor or through a C-section. They had to separate the baby who had already died in the womb from her body. And she was calling that an abortion. And I had to explain to her that that's not an abortion. You did not have an abortion. The biggest lie that is being perpetuated is somehow you have to have an abortion. You have to have access to an abortion in order to treat pregnancy complications. And that is just dishonest, because there is no pregnancy complication that requires an abortion. There are pregnancy complications that may require or necessitate the ending of a pregnancy. We know that to be true, to save a woman's life, but that doesn't necessitate the ending of a baby. An abortion is the intentional ending of a pregnancy so that there is no live birth. That's what an abortion is. So, if a woman has a pregnancy complication and you have to end her pregnancy, a child is born, not dismembered.
Right.
And now the doctor has 2 patients to treat. So it just really, the disinformation that the abortion industry has managed to perpetuate, the fact that they appear to have unlimited resources, financial resources, and they appear to have the mainstream news media on their side. And I find myself constantly reminding people on our side that we have the truth.
Yes.
And the truth is much more powerful than all the money and the news media. And we have to hold on to the truth. And what will truly succeed in weakening our movement is not them. Our movement can only be weakened or destroyed through our willingness to compromise rather than hold fast to the truth. And the truth is that life begins at conception. The truth is that we serve a God who has repeatedly said, at least 9 times that I can think of, that he hates hands that shed innocent blood.
Yes.
And we in the pro-life movement have to hold fast to the truth of God's word and not allow ourselves to be swayed by politics. Because politics, when we look at it from a political perspective rather than a spiritual perspective, then we are opening the door to the possibility of compromising, and we cannot do that.
There are certain things that we can never compromise on, and it has to do with things that are truth and true and factual. He knit us together in the womb. He's the creator of all life, and when he designed that baby and just started that whole process of developing that child, it doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, it's a human life from the very moment of conception. And I recently watched a video of this woman who'd self-administered a chemical abortion. And when she looked down into the toilet after she had passed that baby, she could see through that translucent skin the heart beating slower and slower and stopping. And she talked about the devastation that was for her. And then you also look, all right, so she came to understand that was a life. And then you look at for instance, the stories you related to down in Georgia. This isn't healthcare. This is a death industry, and it sometimes results in the death of the mother who, under the propaganda that the left is using, says that it's intended to save. But the emotional scars that are always there post-abortion, those are things that these women have to live with for the rest of their lives. And absent coming to understand the grace that God offers through Jesus, that I don't know how they end up forgiving themselves. Until you have that relationship with God and have the repentance and say, I made a huge mistake. And that's one of and again, secular humanism is a religion, and the abortion is just one of their sacraments.
Yes.
Until they realize that they're under a false religion, and that they come to understanding the true maker of all of us, and what he offers, and also the things that he finds to be an abomination. As you said, we have to stand on those truths, because if we don't, more and more people are going to be living with lifelong scars, or they're going to be, they may again be killed over this just by their own hand, or by the hand of someone like 𝐉𝐮𝐝, who was supposed to be a physician. And the whole idea of first do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath, we need to bring that back.
Yes, and you're right. I mean, we have a responsibility, and this is the one responsibility that the Bible gives us, is to stand on the truth, speak the truth, spread the gospel. And we have to do so with conviction and with clarity and in love.
Yes.
I mean, the most loving thing we can do for anyone is to expose them to the truth. Because it's only the truth that sets people free and saves them. And so we have to approach these women who find themselves in this situation with love and support. And that's regardless of whether they decide to choose life, or even if they go through with an abortion.
Yes.
We have to still be there to expose them to the truth in love. And that's what separates our movement from their movement, because our movement really does provide women with choice.
Yes.
There's only one choice on the other side, and that's abortion.
And the one of the things I love about crisis pregnancy centers, that the left just rails against them and say they pass on false information, or they don't care about the woman after birth. And that is a total lie right out of the pit of hell, because they are there with these women after they have the baby, or as you indicated, a woman will come in to a crisis pregnancy center and then decide that she's still going to go through with the abortion. But many of them return to the crisis pregnancy center after they've had the abortion, simply because the love and acceptance that the Christian love and acceptance of Christ towards these women, it's like, what did I do? Who can I talk to? And because of that love that's shown at those crisis pregnancy centers, these women know that they can go back there, and somebody's going to wrap their arms around them,
right,
and help them through the trauma that they've inflicted upon themselves. And that's something that they're never going to get out of Planned Parenthood or any of these other organizations, to where they're just a means to some cash or to Satan's ultimate end, the destruction of family and human life.
And we know that to be true about Planned Parenthood, because not only are they the largest provider when it comes to killing babies, they moved into the school system.
Yep.
They have pledged to commit millions of dollars to influence school board races. They're in our schools teaching kids sex education. They are the biggest supporters of the whole transgender movement. They support just about every evil that we can think of, especially as it impacts our children, because they are after our children.
Well, I'm just being reminded that I'm up against a hard deadline. Judge, I'd probably like to get you back on at some point here. I've always appreciated your intelligence, your wisdom, the thoughtfulness that you approach all of these issues, and I'm very grateful to and humbled to have you on the podcast with me. And I just want to say thank you. And would you mind passing on some information about both PA Family, how people can contact you or the organizations you're with?
Through the Pennsylvania Family Institute. We do have a website where we discuss a number of the issues that we're working with and are concerned with. And I can be contacted through that organization. All
right. And we will have the contact information for PA Family in the links to the show. And God bless you, Judge.
God bless you too, because you are you are in a very valuable, very strategic position. And I'm just so grateful that we have people like you in the legislature.
Well, I'm happy to stand shoulder to shoulder with people such as yourself. God bless.
God bless you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.